Hi, this is Amy Fowler. I'm Deputy Secretary for the Agency of Education, and this webinar is a recording of a meeting that was recently held, the CFP conference on March 29th, and gives information about the Every Student Succeeds Act. At the end of that presentation, we had hoped that all of our CFP participants would be able to describe the opportunities that exist for the state of Vermont in merging ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, with education quality standards here in Vermont. They would also be able to articulate the process the agency is pursuing in drafting the state plan. They would offer input and decision-making criteria for some of the state decisions, and then also ask questions related to ESSA implementation. In this webinar, I'll be able to offer you opportunities to do the first and second, and then let you know how you can engage in offering input and also asking questions. So we want to start first by setting the table and getting a common foundation about what ESSA brings to the state of Vermont. And when we are thinking about this, what we're thinking about is how do we link our education quality work and our ESSA work and serve Vermont goals? Well, there are two things that are important to understand. They have different logics about how to help schools improve. Under EQS and EQR, the state education policy, we're focused on the idea of continuous improvement by all schools. ESSA, on the other hand, is focused on identifying and supporting the smallest percentage of schools, 5% specifically, and those that don't meet the needs of specific subgroups. And then the remaining schools are left to improve at their own discretion. So these are two fundamentally different ideas. One is that all schools will be improving, and the other is that we need to identify a subset of schools for specific support. But within that, ESSA is also an opportunity for Vermont. When we look at the decisions that we think are the most important, putting equity at the front, what we can see first is that when we talk about what's going to be measured, under ESSA, we must evaluate math, reading language arts, science, and graduation, and then one other item is required. But we may include as many items as we want. And under EQR, the Education Quality Review process, every one of the ESSA requirements was included, and then we had additional items. So there's nice alignment there. A second area is in the concern for equity. Both ESSA and EQR are absolutely committed to reducing equity gaps among students. They both are committed to local improvement where states support the local supervisory union or supervisory district, who then in turn supports their schools. They both ask that technical assistance be provided to the supervisory union and the supervisory district. And they also require the publishing of report cards at the state and local level. And EQR was going to do that as well. But there are some places where there are challenges and decisions that we'll have to make. We have to weigh the pros and cons. So for example, one of those items is an index of school quality. In ESSA, we have to figure out how we'll weight different measures in order to identify which schools would be the 5% that receive support. In Education Quality Review, we had not intended to collapse all of our measures into a single measure. We had intended instead to share all of the results of the data and let communities decide what meaning and what weight to put on each of those. So that's a difference. A second difference is in how you identify struggling schools. Under ESSA, we must identify the lowest 5% of schools for support. In addition to that, any schools that have 33% of their ninth grade cohort not graduating in 4 years, and schools with high equity gaps. So it's specifically named who we must provide additional support to. Under EQR, we didn't intend to identify specific percentage of schools for intervention. That was something that we were looking to see what schools, if there were any schools that were outliers and needed supports, or mostly just leave this to the local community to determine. A third major difference is in the timeliness. Annual determinations are required under ESSA. We must say every year how a school has performed. Under EQR, we were looking at doing those full reviews every 3 years. And then the last area where we see a big difference is in the measures that are being used. Under ESSA, they must meet some technical criteria as being valid and reliable outcome measures. But in EQR, we were looking at both input, such as how much money do we spend on teachers and what's the access to nurses, and outcome measures. And so we need to think about how we might do that. What we do see, however, is that if we can link our ESSA and EQR work, we can do a number of great things for the state of Vermont. So first and foremost, it would provide one single coherent accountability system where what happens for one whatever determination is made under ESSA, it would be the same as what the state level determination is. It would also allow us to leverage our federal and state resources in a coordinated way so that all resources are used to support the same work. It reduces the strain of implementing two parallel systems on the schools and the agency, making us more efficient. And we think we can do this without losing all of the hard work that's already been put into the education quality review. We can select some of our snapshot indicators to create the index. The input indicators might be used to help shape improvement plans, and our integrated field reviews could be some kind of technical assistance or exit criteria. So we're optimistic we can make this happen. So now it's time to start thinking about that table we're setting and get into some of the details. How are we going to make this plan come into action? Well, one of the most important things to think about is the timeline for how the state plan is written. The new accountability system working backwards starts to be applied in August of 2017. The agency would like to be able to have our plan accepted before schools go to vacation for the summer, so we plan to be able to show that in June of 2017. So as a result, between December 2015 when the plan was written and June 2017, we have a number of steps in order. Rules and regulations are expected from the federal government in October, November, so we'll be finalizing our state plan at that time. In December, the plan would be posted for public input and modified, and in January submitted for approval from the U.S. Education Department. They are entitled to up to 120 days to review the plan, and so we've left enough time that we could do 2 reviews if needed. So we're on a pretty aggressive timeline, hoping to have a plan written in December. Well, between December and November, what we've engaged in is a series of decision-making that will allow us to get the best thoughts on paper before those rules and regulations come out, so that when they are actually out, we're ready to start responding. In order to do this, we have 4 key groups that are giving us input, and I'm going to speak about each of these groups in a bit of detail. So the first is that we have a state plan management team. The state plan management team meets every 2 to 3 weeks, and our job is to make sure that as we're making decisions and recommendations in any one of these teams, that it is coordinated and it also supports integration of work. The first team is the assessment and accountability team. This looks at things related to state level testing, how schools will be measured to determine if there's a quality education or not, and the ways in which we'll communicate that to the public. A second team is the Consolidated Federal Programs team. This team is looking at a wide variety of items, including how we provide students the services to our homeless youth, what we're going to do in terms of responding to the needs of our military families and our foster youth, which are 2 new groups, the ways in which we'll do applications for funding and the requirements there, because this is a very integrated piece of work. A third group is the educator quality group. They're looking at the issues that are specifically related to Title IIA. That has to do with professional development and teacher licensure, and also leadership development. And our last group is the school effectiveness group. This group is looking at what do we do to support the 5% of schools that are identified, what kinds of technical assistance are valuable, and what is the continuous improvement plan cycle, what is that involving for all schools. So those are the 4 major teams. Now, each one of those teams also has what's called the bounce team. And those bounce teams also meet every 2 to 3 weeks, and they include other members of the agency that can help inform decisions related to the particular topic. And so the lead of this team will go to the bounce team to get their ideas on certain topics and then bring them back in order to make a recommendation. The bounce teams, having informed that lead member of the state plan management team, then creates an overview of how they intend to engage the field in giving input. And they send those recommendations to the FIT team, which is the field input team. And what happens here is the FIT team is comprised of teachers, administrators, representatives of policy groups and education boards, student advocacy groups, and institutes of higher education. And the agency will be bringing forward a recommendation for whether or not a particular item requires input from the field, and if so, what we recommend in terms of input. And then the field input team will let us know if that matches their expectation as members of the field in order to facilitate that communication. So just to clarify how this works, the various bounce teams meet as independent groups. They inform the state plan management team. The FIT team checks their work, and these groups down here are called stakeholder groups, and from time to time there'll be up to 16 to 20 opportunities for members of the public to participate in small focus groups that inform decisions. The state plan management team then, as a result of all of that information flowing in, will be making recommendations to the leadership team that ultimately will decide which things we put forward in our plan. In terms of public input, there are multiple opportunities for this, and I'm going to give you a quick tour of our website, which you've likely already been to if you're seeing this webinar. But there are opportunities when we'll be surveying the public or perhaps a targeted audience on a topic. There are webinars and telemeetings that we'll have from time to time, and focus groups. And right now we're actually recruiting for our first two groups, and that will give me a chance to show you our webpage. So you can go to the webpage at the Agency of Education, and you'll see that it has 4 major categories at the top. Here gives a description of the decision-making criteria we have. There are frequently asked questions that are listed here. If you would like to ask a question, simply click on the survey, type your question in, and you'll see that those start to appear here. There are also a description of the many decisions that we are currently reviewing. Those decisions are listed by cycle, and so you'll see some description of what the ESSA requirement is, what's the question that is being considered, and which one of those bounce teams is reviewing it. And then you'll see that we have up through cycle 6 as well. As we start to make decisions, the decisions are recorded here. The proposed decision is written in this column, and there's always a rationale that explains why that decision is being made. And then finally at the bottom, opportunities for involvement. Right now we're collecting volunteers who'd like to participate in the first 2 focus groups, which you can check in here, and there's other work here. If you want to receive updates here, you can also sign up for the field memo, which gives updates. So that's what you can find on the web page and how you can access that information. We do estimate 16 to 20 focus groups over the next 6 months. So the next question we have to ask ourselves is, what will we include in this plan? And we have some choices. We can have a really, really clean table that's somewhat austere, or we could include everything and have a busy table like this one. And one of the challenges with ESSA is there are so many options and flexibilities for states that we could very easily create a complicated table that isn't necessarily very functional. And so to help that, we've come up with a decision logic that helps us understand how we'll make decisions. And there are 4 key questions that we consider each and every time. So the first is that we are making decisions with equity in mind. And so whenever we have competing recommendations, the decision that best serves the interest of Vermont's most vulnerable students is the one we'll pursue. The money that comes from the federal government is specifically to increase opportunities, and so while there may be times where a particular group or a particular decision, a majority of opinion is for one option, but it is actually in disservice to those students, we will not be going with the majority opinion. A second critical decision logic is whether or not the choice we are looking at is in alignment with education quality standards. If it isn't in alignment with the standards, or it's a slight variation, it's likely we won't make that choice because we want to create a streamlined education system where all actions are aligned in the same direction. The third criteria is efficiency. We're looking to see when we are faced with these competing recommendations, what will be the decision that creates the least burden, both fiscal and human resources wise, on our schools and on our agency as well. And then the last is really thinking about practicality. So when we're faced with these competing recommendations, what do we think we can achieve and achieve well, given the limited resources that we have here in the state of Vermont? And so at that point, we would have opened it up for questions. And so again, I would encourage you to please enter any question you might have into the frequently asked question. Thank you.